Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, yeah, my voice, it still sucks, but believe it or not, I'm not really struggling to talk to you guys today. My voice just sounds like pure unadulterated crap, and I can't really help it. But I'm doing my best to gain it back. It's just that there's something in here, guys, and it just doesn't want to go away. But I'm here today, and we're here to record another episode of Must Be Read, once again, celebrating the 85th anniversary of Batman. So, Cammy is here again. Cammy, it's great to see you as always.
Good to see you guys too.
And I'm very happy to say that Lindsay from Studio Lindsay has made her triumphant return. So, Lindsay, it's so great to have you back for another Batman discussion.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And today we're going to be discussing an iconic Batman story. It was written in a very interesting year for Batman. 1986 saw one of the greatest Batman stories given to us, The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. Who would have expected that after the fourth issue of that miniseries would pop into comic stores, a month later, he would be writing Batman issues 404 to 407, giving us the Batman Year One story with artwork by Frank Mazzucchelli. So, of course, Batman Year One is the first year of Bruce Wayne putting on the mask, as well as the story of Lieutenant James Gordon coming to work in Gotham City for the very first time in probably Gotham at its worst, and the two of them with parallel stories running towards each other and connecting eventually. It's about the two of them trying to make Gotham City a better place in the only ways that they can. So, to the both of you, I guess we'll start with Lindsay. This was your first time reading it. What did you think?
I really enjoyed the story. I didn't know very much about it other than that it was year one, Batman's first year. And I was pleasantly surprised that we were also seeing James Gordon's story as well, and the two of their stories, seeing both of their origin stories, I guess, and how they both made different decisions and eventually came together at the end. That was a really great reading experience. And I also read The Dark Knight Returns right afterward. And for anybody who hasn't read them yet, I really recommend reading them both back to back. It was a really enjoyable experience.
So, Cammy, you continue to venture down the comic book rabbit hole, but being the Batman fan that you are, what did you think of this book?
Well, first I want to say a double C in Italian is K, so it's Mazzucchelli is how you say his last name. It's not
Okay.
Chelly, but beyond, it's not very often that I get to correct you in the world of comics, so it's a
I know
rarity for me.
you're just trying to do another one of those little bouts and stats that we did last time.
Oh, I'm not confrontational. I swear, Lindsay. I swear. It's just Batman. So, okay, this one for me, it took me a couple goes at it. I'll be honest. So it definitely gave me vintage vibes. In terms of kind of. I think this is where the Long Halloween derived from, but I didn't appreciate it at first. It took me a minute because I'll be honest, I did it backwards, and I don't do this a lot, but sometimes when I want to get in the right headspace and I kind of just want to get a feel for it, I will watch the movie adaptation before I read the comic, if there is one. And usually that works well in the book world, but not always in the comic world. But I watched the animated version of this first, and then I jumped into the comic. I then um rewatched the movie because I didn't really care for either one in the beginning. I was really loving the Commander Gordon line, the storyline rather, but I wasn't connecting with the Batman version of this. So after doing everything twice, I began to appreciate it the second go round. And I will say though, to the defense of this masterpiece that is loved so much by the Batman community, that the coloring and the artistry chef's kiss. It had me from the jump. I love the gritty Batman feel. I love it when Gotham gets dirty. And I love it when we start there, when we start in the heart of Gotham and we get a feel for the darkness that is Gotham. So I grew to love it. It is not my favorite, but I definitely grew to love it.
Cammy, I gotta be honest with you. There are so many great Batman stories out there. There's so many, and we're gonna try and cover as many as we can to celebrate the 85th anniversary of Batman. But I gotta be truthfully honest, guys. Batman Year One is not one of my favorites. It's not one that I don't like, but it's definitely not one of my favorites. I mean, Lindsay, since you read this one and the Dark Knight Returns back to back, I will say that I prefer the Dark Knight Returns over Batman Year One. I appreciate Frank Miller for the person that he is in terms of writing other great works that he has done outside of Batman, like Sin City and 300. He's a great writer. But for me, it's a good Batman story. It's very rich in detail. The narrative is definitely very unique. Cammy, I will also agree with you. The artwork, while it's definitely not like a Todd McFarlane or a Brett Booth or a Dan Mora or, dare I say it, Alex Ross, there's nothing else like Alex Ross out there. But for what it is, for the purpose of the story, it is the right artistry for the story that's being told. We're hearing a story about corruption, crime, danger in Gotham City, the worst place to live, as Lieutenant Gordon says at the very beginning, wondering why he and his wife are going to have a child in this world, in this city per se. So the dirtiness and the rough edges encompasses the story perfectly. But again, for me personally, not my all-time favorite Batman story, but I totally understand why people truly enjoy it.
Yeah, I think reading this now and then merging that into a long Halloween, I think to me that pairs. I mean, I know Lindsay said she read a different sequence and that worked well for her, but I think for me, the grit matches, the color pattern matches, the year timeline matches, the Falcone appearance is there, and that it is a definite element of Batman that I absolutely love. When we bring in the gangsters and the mafia side of that, it just really brings in the grit and the dirt, and the fact that they were tied into a chief that was, dirty, a cop that was dirty. Well, there was a lot of dirty cops in this one. I think that just adds to the element that, hey, look how far we've come in Gotham City. Look what Batman really did for Gotham City, but again, for me, it was the connection to Batman. And I think in this, obviously, we are kind of in a different parallel where we're looking at Batman starting off in a different way, which is cool. I mean, people get bored, and that's really what this story was all about. It was about refreshing Batman and, at the time, Superman and Wonder Woman, and kind of breathing life back into these characters that had kind of been sedent since the 40s. That I can appreciate, but I think it's hard when these creators have these visions, to sometimes connect to these stories. And really, I've heard content creators say this before. I don't create content for you. I create it for me as the creator. And if you happen to resonate with it, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. It's not everything is for everyone. Move on to the next. So just because this isn't my favorite Batman story doesn't mean there isn't amazing elements of it. That doesn't mean there isn't areas of this that I didn't connect with. But it's gonna rank a little bit lower than.
You definitely hit a very important fact, and that is that comics were in a time of rebirth, particularly in DC. This was after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So they were getting a lot of artists and writers to come in and bring the darkness back to comics. It was happening already in Marvel with stories like the death of Gwen Stacy over in Spider-Man or the Dark Phoenix saga in X-Men. So after a monumental story like Crisis on Infinite Earth, where was DC going to go? So we started seeing the Frank Millers of the world and the Alan Moores of the world starting to come in to play their games and tell their stories. At this exact same year, Lindsay, we were talking about why 1986 was just a big year for DC Comics. This is also the same year that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbon were creating Watchmen. So comics was really in the middle of a big renaissance. And Frank Miller's stories, particularly the two Batman stories, were really big driving forces of this time.
That was the reason he was hired, was to revamp Batman. He took on the job that everyone else was kind of afraid to do, because my understanding of the history of it, that Superman's vision was already, kind of laid out. Wonder Woman's vision was laid out. They knew exactly what they wanted to do with these characters, but nobody wanted to touch Batman, because again, I think the same feelings that I have that resonate with me with this particular story is like, I think this is why it doesn't resonate so strongly with me, because how do you change perfection? We had the Batman story set in stone. We knew exactly his origin story, where he started, where he resonated from, and it worked really well. It explained the darkness and the grittiness and the anger and the angst and all of the things that Batman is, and the why behind why he created the Batman, the connection. So to change that origin story and to have readers accept it, you are going to have a divide. You're either going to have people that just eat it up and embrace it and love everything about it, or you're going to have someone like me that's kind of like, it was good, but it wasn't great. And it sucks, because I know how beloved this is, and just how it resonates with so many people. It's still loved and discussed today. But it's kind of reassuring for me to hear that it's not one of your favorites, Steve, because I would have expected it to rank higher for you. And the fact that it doesn't shows that, okay, maybe I am a true Batman fan, and I'm very particular about what I love and what I don't. And that's okay, this wasn't horrible. It's just not one of my favorites.
But it's definitely not a bad story at all. I mean, Lindsay, you haven't really read that many Batman comics. So I'm really curious to know if the more that you stick around here with us, I mean, welcome to the Nut House, I guess. I'm wondering how your attitude will change if you start reading things like Arkham Asylum or The Killing Joke, or going into some of the new stuff like Batman and the Joker, The Deadly Duo, or this beauty that just came out this week. Oh my God, Dan Jurgens, Mike Perkins, you wonderful beasts, you. This is going to be an instant classic, everybody. The Batman, the first night. Cammy, you didn't need to sell me. This was already on my pull list because I'm such a Dan Jurgens fan. I knew this was going to be good. I didn't know it was going to be that good, but we're not talking about this tonight.
It's that artwork. That artwork would just completely suck me in. I didn't care if it was good, bad, or otherwise, but what the premise of it was, as soon as I got, the timeline and the era that it was written in, I was like, oh snap, this is going to be one for the masses. I mean, honestly, there's just so much beauty, and I haven't even cracked it open yet. So yeah, I can't wait to dive into that one.
And I'm just glad that it's good, because there are so many people that are hating on Batman right now in regards to the current runs of the comics. I mean, so many people are saying horrible things about Chip Zdarsky right now, because he just did 3 issues of Batman where he gave us Joker Year One. And I know we had this conversation. All of us were in this room with Andy when we were doing the character profile of Batman. When the first issue of Joker Year One came out, you want to know what I was seeing in like message boards? Oh no, not the Joker again. Everybody, like, the whole thing about being Joker heavy. And the truth of the matter is, Joker Year One, those 3 issues, they were horrible. Absolutely horrible. But Batman the First Night, thank God. And at the same time, it's good to mention a new book like that, because there is no doubt in my mind that Dan Jurgens got some inspiration from this.
Yeah, I think again, Batman is just one of those, the fans are going to love it, they're going to hate it. I will stand on my Joker hill and die, though. I mean, Joker is the quintessential villain for Batman. I don't care who writes it, if it's good, bad, or otherwise. Obviously, that's a discussion for the topic at hand and the book that we're discussing. But I think that with Batman, and this is probably true to form with any superhero, whether we're talking about Superman or Wonder Woman or whatever, you're going to have these epic series, these mini series, or these stories, one-offs, what that are just so incredible, they last the tell of time. So the fact that this was written in the 80s and we're talking about it now speaks volumes for it, because whether you did love it or hate it, obviously people are still reading it. There's a lot to be said with this, but I think, beyond what I've already said as to why I don't think it's heavily connected with me, I think one of the things that I do love about some of the later year Batman, and we're talking like late 90s Batman, that I do really resonate early 2000s, is when Batman gets dark, when DC got dark, and when they weren't afraid to go there, and when they weren't afraid to kind of just say all the things that you can't say here. Although that blotter that's in the front, there was some misogynistic things that were said in that crime blotter. I was like, whoa, that's something you probably couldn't say today. But aside from that, I think that, as we've gone on, obviously the censorship has kind of tapered down, and we can say things now that we couldn't say back in the late 80s. That said, for a fan like me, I look for that grittiness. I look for the disturbing. I look for, in some elements, the real horror, like when we get a different side to a character. And I think that's why in this particular book, or in this series of 4, because of course I read the bind up, but I did end up getting the floppies I shared with Steve. I got the fan smile floppies, which are super cool. I think that's why I resonated so heavily with Commissioner Gordon on this one, because this is a side of the commissioner that I hadn't seen before. One, he's a lieutenant. Two, he's being super candid. We're getting inside his head. We're knowing his thoughts. You're hearing his fears in a way, but in the same respect, we're also watching his growth, and we're seeing him kind of come into his own and be like, all right, assholes, I'm in Gotham now, and thanks for showing me how to be a Gotham City cop. And it's like, yeah, let's do this, So that for me was like the quintessential character of this particular story.
So first, I'm going to zap you back, Tammy. The issues, the floppies that you're referring to, it's pronounced facsimile.
See, I knew you'd snap back. I knew you'd snap back. It's all good. It's all
But I
good.
want you to know that for future reference.
Thank you.
So,
I appreciate when I get correct. If I'm wrong, call me out on it. Same goes for you, Lindsay. If you see me making error, be the first to snap at it, because I know Steve will.
well, this is when I want to bring Lindsay into the conversation, because she's been the wallflower. I really want her to give us some of her contributions. If you really think about it, guys, this book, Batman Year One, at least from what I can tell, is more of a Commissioner Gordon story than it is a Batman story. And I love the fact that it is, because it also reminds me of another great book, Marvels, about the outside looking in. So let's talk a little bit about Commissioner Gordon starting out as a lieutenant coming into Gotham City, and your thoughts on his story and the obstacles that he encounters until he actually finds out about Batman and that he's actually one of the good guys.
Yeah, so like Cami said, I also wasn't expecting a lot of I wasn't expecting to see so much of Commissioner Gordon's story. And I do agree that this is definitely more of his story. We, like she said, we see inside, we're reading his thoughts, and we're kind of seeing him come to Gotham for the first time. And I think his story was a lot more compelling than Batman's story. So for Batman, um, I guess we're seeing a lot of Batman, but not so much Bruce Wayne in this story. Until maybe not until one scene at the very end. Whereas Commissioner Gordon. So to compare and contrast those two characters, I think the best way to sum it up is that uh, Batman knows what he wants, just not quite how to execute it. And then Gordon kind of knows what he doesn't want and continues going down a path that he doesn't really like. He kind of allows Gotham to corrupt him over time until he kind of, like Cami said, kind of understands what the city is about and how he needs to respond. And by the end, I think he knows how he wants to move forward. I think that's how I would kind of compare those two stories. And I think Commissioner Gordon's story was a lot more compelling than Batman's. But at the same time, I really did like Batman's story because it reminded me that Batman is human like the rest of us. He knows what he wants to do, and he starts the Batman career, but he doesn't even have a costume at the beginning. He doesn't even think about wearing a mask until a bat flies into his office, and he's reminded of a childhood memory. And then even when he dons the suit and starts fighting crime, he's kind of clumsy. And so for me personally, I haven't read a lot of Batman comics, but from what I read here, I just really liked that reminder that yeah, he messes up too. So
Yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of people connect to Batman, because he's human. He's a very human superhero because he doesn't have powers. He's very much, especially when he's compared to other heroes, especially when he's teamed up with the Justice League. His superpower is his mind and his money to a certain degree. But yeah, we're reminded that he's a man. We see a very human, very down to earth story. And also, we see two guys from two completely different social classes. We see a blue collar guy and a very much a white collar guy. And it's amazing how the two of them, at the end of the day, what do they want? They want truth and justice for Gotham City. And that's a really great way to connect these two kinds of people.
I think too that for me is probably yet another reason. What Lindsay had just pointed out is the human connection. I have spent my entire life defending Batman and the fact that he is human, but he's a superhero. Like, get over the fact that he's human. And I try to get people to focus on the superhero elements of Batman. Like, okay, he's proven himself, he's overcome this. And so when we see a more human side to, Bruce Wayne, but it's not, even you had mentioned this also, it's not like we're looking at Bruce Wayne so much. We're watching the development of Batman, but we're looking at Bruce Wayne. And so for me, my brain is just like, it's tweaking out, I'm like, stop. This is what I've spent my whole life telling people to not focus on. And this is exactly what this story is focusing on. So there was just a lot of battle within my own head. So, it was refreshing to get the Gordon element of the story. And then we did get some other parts and pieces too. We got to see a little bit more of his wife, and you don't get to see that a lot. You got to see the birth of his child, how important and significant the role of being a father was to him, and how he was just so driven to protect his child, both unborn and then born. You just saw sincerity in terms of the way he felt after he was unfaithful, and to see that in a comic was also like eye opening, especially in the 80s. I mean, not that it's never not been taboo to talk about, something like that, but you just don't really see it put on pages. So there was just so many different background elements to other characters. But again, I think I was just so far removed from Batman that I was trying to connect to other portions of this story. And I think that really for me saved me going through this, because I was able to just really appreciate even like Fast, the or Flash, Cricket Cop. I was just enjoying his storyline and just, really embracing that element of a dirty cop. And these are probably characters that I would have just dismissed if Batman was the true superhero that I grew up loving in other stories. It's
Things that you just
my molehill.
so there's two things that you mentioned in that last piece that you just said. You talked about how you hadn't seen certain things until the 80s, And then you also mentioned other characters. Well, there is another very big character in Batman's lexicon that decides to take up her own mantle in a completely different way. We're also introduced to Selena Kyle, aka
Oh,
Catwoman. And I'm very, very
duh.
glad, and I'm very glad that we're finally talking about her because in the character profiles episode, when we talked about Batman's Rogues Gallery, shocker, we never mentioned Catwoman. So here we are making up for this. So we're introduced to Selena Kyle, and she's a street hustler.
Yeah, that was interesting. I think that was jarring for me too. I mean, we basically got to see the red light district of Gotham City. I was like, whoa, what is happening, Selena Kyle? Stop my eyes. Shield me, shield me. I was doing what my mom used to do as a kid, don't let me look. It's funny though, because I'm such a cat person in real life. It's so funny how I just completely dismissed Catwoman and she's one of the coolest villains. But yeah, this was a really gritty version of Selena Kyle. And just to kind of see her go from streetwalker to this, what we know now as a super villain of the Gotham City, a Batman contender. You also got to see that development and just how protective she is too, which is super cool. She was like a mother figure in this in a way.
Yeah, to Holly.
But she's a badass. She was a total badass.
Yeah, I think what was very interesting was even though we know that she is a very well known Batman villain, to a certain degree, also an anti hero, I think this might have actually been the very first time that she was depicted as an anti hero because she's trying to take down Falcone. Like she's trying to take down the mob. I mean,
We did that in the Long Halloween
well, that's
too,
what I'm
though.
saying. But that's what I'm saying because in the Long Halloween, which was another clearly Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale were clearly inspired by Frank Miller's work because they specifically wanted to make sure in their version that we saw the scratches on his face. Batman Year was where
Oh,
Selena gives him the scratch.
it comes full circle now.
There you go. There you go. Lindsay, what did you think about seeing a Rogues Gallery member like Selena Kyle in this book, especially with the role that she played?
Yeah, it was a really pleasant surprise to see Selena Kyle here, because like I said, I didn't really know much about the story going into it, so it was really cool to see her in here. Um, and I think uh, one part, I think if I'm remembering this correctly, that stood out to me is that uh, while Batman was kind of his origin story was playing out, he kind of sort of inspired her a little bit to become Catwoman woman, but at the same time when like news reporters mistook her crimes as like, oh, perhaps this was Batman, she's like, that wasn't Batman, that was me, and would get so I really liked that part of the story.
Yeah, and also, Tammy, you mentioned the animated film. That's a great movie. Eliza Dushku as Selena. She's perfect. What a great choice. The
She
whole
is.
cast for
Yeah.
that animated movie is wonderful. And Lindsay, I would highly recommend you check that one out because the best part about that one, and ironically, the Dark Knight Returns movie as well, they really try to hold true to the comic art. And the color palette in the Batman Year One movie is very much the comic book in all the best ways possible.
Yeah, you get to see that sometimes in animation, and this one was A plus plus. I think that the animated version was very realistic in terms of just bringing the pages to life. But yeah, Elijah Dushku as Selena Kyle was spot on. I mean, she just had the right attitude, and I think the whole voice cast was perfection for that particular animated film.
Well, I love in that animated film that Ben McKenzie is the voice of Batman, and he would later become Jim Gordon in the show Gotham. I just love how that
Yes,
came full circle as well. But, you
agreed.
know, that's the other thing that we have to give credit to Batman Year One. So many things after this story were very much inspired by it, whether it was comics like The Long Halloween or movies like Batman Begins. I mean, Flash is a character in Batman Begins. Completely different portrayal than what he's portrayed as in the comic book, but still, Christopher Nolan really grabbed a lot from that book. And just the way that, of course, Bruce Timm depicts his versions of the characters, even though his is a little bit more family friendly when it comes to things like Batman the Animated Series, you still see a ton of inspiration from these incredible books from the early and mid 1980s.
That's one of the things that I do appreciate about the Batman detail is that there is a lot of homage that's paid as they bring in different creators, regardless of where they come from, what their background is. They put a lot of heart and soul into the history of Batman and going back and looking at past series or past animation that's created, and they bring a lot of those elements to the table, which as a fan I can seriously appreciate, because it's those little Easter eggs that really just bring all the good feels to you. You know, when you're watching it, you're like, oh man, this is awesome. You know, whatever it is, whatever resonates with you, whether it's a particular character or revisiting of a character in a different way. You know, there's a lot of really cool things that happen in the Batman universe that I really appreciate that creators take the time to do.
Yeah. Does anyone want to get a little bit cringy and talk about that absolute cringe moment in the book? The scene where Jim Gordon and his wife come to Wayne Manor and
Oh,
Bruce is like totally staging like he's a true drunk playboy. Like that scene, that part in the book, and I think in the movie it's even worse, where he basically says, "This is my lady friend. I don't know her name, but I love her anyway." Like, wow. Like, I think you're really trying to be a little bit over the top here, Brucey. We know you're trying to hide something, but boy, you're really pushing the envelope here.
It took me a minute when you said cringy, because I completely like blocked that from my mind. I'm like, what is he doing? Oh my God, this is so gross.
Yeah,
Like what is this scene? What is happening here? So
yeah,
yeah,
it's the
it's
one scene that just doesn't fit. I mean,
no, not
it's a very important part of the story. But Lindsay, do you want to jump in on this one?
I'll jump in, but I don't really know what else to add to it. I guess the I do remember that scene mainly because it's like the only time that I remember him like being I guess not Batman to anybody else except for like Alfred. Like we see some of like Bruce throughout the comic, but it's like him in private kind of thinking about his Batman persona, and this is the only time he's not really doing that. Um yeah, it was pretty odd. So
I would have loved for Alfred to have come in at that point with some comedic relief. And I think we get that, you know, later with the 90s, 2000s version of Batman. Alfred plays a much bigger role in his life. But we so needed Alfred in that moment. Like, Alfred, please save us from this horror that we are watching. And I'm not talking about the one on the couch.
Like, it reminds me of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, or no, not even Batman Mask of the Phantasm. I think it was the very first episode of the show where Alfred like calls in to Bruce. He's like, "I'm sorry, Master Bruce, but Miss Bambi is dancing on the piano."
Yeah, we needed an element like that. Anything from Alfred at that point. It was just, yeah, it was gross and unnecessary. And I wish I didn't have to see it, but now I can't unsee it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Batman is probably for me, he's the lowest point of the book for me. I mean, I totally get the story behind it, but I don't know. It's just like, I know that they're trying to tell a story about him being human, him trying to figure out what his end all goal is for becoming the Batman, but I don't know. Maybe it's just because of the fact that as a true Batman fan who's been a Batman fan since he was like 3 years old, you expect Batman to be pure, like he can do no wrong. it's just very weird to see Batman in this light, especially when you're reading this version, when you're reading this book for the first time.
And that's what I'm saying about the human element. I have a really hard time connecting to the human element that he is. And I don't mean Bruce Wayne, because when you see Bruce Wayne, the businessman, the debonair, the party goer, the entertainer, that's what you expect. You expect, because he's always very reserved and distinguished. He's a man of few words. He makes an appearance. He does what he does, and then he vanishes. That human side to him is what I expect. When you start getting inside his head and he starts questioning himself, and then there's just this whole weird dialogue, and then you have just this strange, just kind of twisted storyline, it was just very hard to connect with. So I was just very appreciative for the other characters that we got, the other storylines that we got, because it really carried this story.
Believe it or not, the negativity that's sort of been thrown around throughout this entire video. If Andy was here, he would probably try to reach out of the screen and strangle one of us, most likely me. But
Is this one of his favorites?
I think it's his favorite of all time.
Oh, I need to know why now. Why, Andy? Why?
Well,
I don't.
well,
Yeah, the banter you and I had last time, I'd probably be having that with Andy right now. Like, listen, sir, let me slap you silly, okay? Because this is not the greatest Batman story ever told.
the fact that it was such an impactful book, such an impactful 4 issues of Batman, and seeing what we've received afterwards with all the writers and creators that were inspired by it, it's still very tough to truly say this is bad, because it's not bad. It's just not my personal favorite. But I'm so glad that it's here, and I'm glad that it exists, because we wouldn't have some of the greatest Batman stories ever told in the decades to follow.
Well, what I think I will say, in a note of positivity, because I don't want to be a negative Nancy in the whole video, but I will say that I think what this did do for Batman is it did give it the resurgence. So mission accomplished, DC, because I think what we had in terms of Batman before was very cookie cutter. And again, it appeals to a fan like me. I know what to expect. I know what I want. I know what I'm getting when I dive into it, and it's cut and dry. I'm just going to get, a different story told to me. However, when we read this 4-part issue, and we read it, whether graphic novel, what have you, however you consume this, we get a completely different take on Gotham, a completely different take on these characters, and then we get a totally different Batman. So it did throw us for a loop. It did kind of, put us on edge, and we're like, "Oh." And it maybe kind of awakened the senses and the spirits of all of these of all of these creators down the line, and that is why we have these epic stories that I love so much, because it allowed us to be able to see that these characters are not one dimensional. Just because we've created these storylines of them doesn't mean this is where they have to die. This can be multifaceted. We can look at this from a different perspective, and we can take this in places that we haven't gone. And Lord knows, if stories like this weren't created, we would probably not have Elseworlds. We would not be able to go to all these uncharted places and see all of these things that wouldn't have been possible if we would have just stayed in the 1938 version of Batman. So I can appreciate the story for what it did for future tellings of Batman. And just because this isn't my favorite version of Batman doesn't mean there aren't great elements of the story. And not to say that historically it didn't change the future of Batman for the.
Right. So, Lindsay, you read this and the other big piece of Frank Miller's work, It's the Dark Knight Returns. So, how do you feel about Frank Miller as a writer in general?
I think I might need some more time to kind of unpack that and really, like, I guess all I can say is I really like his how he takes the story. Um, I guess like a different opinion than I think it was Cammy who mentioned earlier that you liked The Dark Knight Returns more than Batman Year One. I actually preferred Batman Year One to Dark Knight Returns, and that I think that's more of a personal preference because I at the same time I don't know I thought I'd like the other one more because Joker's in it. It's a very captivating premise. Batman's coming out of retirement, and it was very exciting. But I think it personal preference. I think having so many panels on one page was a little bit tough for me at times. So I don't remember how many panels exactly, but there were a lot of really small panels, especially when the reporters were coming on. That kind of took me a while. It was still a great story, but yeah, I really liked this one better as opposed to his other work. But I really like his writing. I like how he really taps into the human side of both Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon, and really addresses like what they might have been struggling or what they were struggling with. And yeah, so that's all I can say right now. I think.
Hey, so I think that this is a great place to stop and wrap it all up. So yeah, that's Batman Year One to us, guys. If you're a fan, we hope that you weren't too taken aback by some of the things that were said today. But rest assured, we still very much respect this work because it is still one of the most important pieces of Batman's lore, and we're very glad that it's here. But we're really excited for our next discussion when we bring another one of Batman's stories to the front to discuss. Lindsay, we hope you'll be back. I believe Andy will be back. And we're going to be talking about one of the newer stories that was written in the world of Batman. And spoiler alert, it does involve the Joker. So we're going to get a little Joker centric next time. But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment in the box below. Let us know how you felt. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. And we'll see you in the next one.